Imagine this. You have everything you've ever dreamed. Wealth, status, luxury beyond compare. But late at night, staring at your own reflection, you can't help but wonder, why do I feel so empty? Now, what if someone approached you with a life-altering proposition? I can take your soul and place it in another body. You can leave all of this behind, start over, truly free. But you can never go back. What would you do? The screen cuts to black. A sharp gasp echoes as we see a glamorous woman, Mrs. Reimer, gazing intently into a mirror, her diamonds catching the light. Her eyes reveal a mix of sadness and longing. The sound of a clock ticking grows louder, building tension. Suddenly, she jolts awake, but she's no longer in her opulent mansion. Instead, she's lying in a simple farmhouse bed, the morning light streaming through a worn curtain. Her surroundings are unfamiliar, rustic, and strangely comforting. A voiceover draws the audience further in. This isn't a dream. This isn't science fiction. This is the extraordinary tale of a woman who gave up everything she had to discover the one thing she truly needed: happiness. The visuals shift between contrasting scenes. Mrs. Reimer sipping champagne at a lavish party, surrounded by strangers with fake smiles, then struggling to carry a basket of fresh eggs on a foggy farm, her laugh echoing in the open air. The transition is stark, jarring, and magnetic. As the clock ticks down to the end of the segment, the narrator asks, "What price would you pay to escape a life that feels like a cage? Could you leave behind the comfort of riches for the uncertainty of freedom?" This is the story of Mrs. Reimer, and her answer might surprise you. The screen lingers on her hesitant yet hopeful expression as she looks out over a quiet field, the promise of something new just beyond the horizon. The tension is palpable, the questions unshakable, the audience is hooked. Meet the client. The story shifts to a grand, silent estate. A chandelier glitters in the dim light, and the sound of echoing footsteps breaks the stillness. Mrs. Reimer sits in a lavish parlor, her perfectly manicured hands clasping a glass of sherry. Her face, though adorned with fine makeup, reveals something deeper, a loneliness that no wealth can mask. Not long ago, this was a woman whose laughter echoed through sunlit fields, who found joy in simple things. But life has a way of turning dreams into gilded cages. A flashback paints her origins, a young farm girl with dirt-streaked cheeks and a wide, unguarded smile, tending to chickens and racing through golden meadows. Her world changes the day she meets Abner Reimer, a kind-hearted but ambitious engineer. He speaks of inventions and prosperity, of a future brighter than the stars. They marry in a modest church, her dreams tied to his promises of a better life. Cut to a montage. Abner's success soars, and so does their wealth. Factories rise, money flows, and their lives transform. Yet, as the years pass, the couple's laughter fades, replaced by silence in their sprawling mansion. The narrator continues. Abner built an empire, but he could not build a bridge back to the woman he fell in love with. When he passed away, he left her everything, except the one thing she truly needed. Back in the present, Mrs. Reimer stares out the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass. Her voice breaks the silence. "I thought I'd be happy. Isn't that what wealth is supposed to bring? But I've never felt more alone." The camera pans to reveal Parker Pyne sitting across from her, his expression calm but curious. He leans forward slightly, his voice low and enigmatic. "Happiness, Mrs. Reimer, isn't bought. It's found, and sometimes you have to lose everything to find it." Her eyes narrow, skepticism flickering. "And what exactly are you offering me?" she asks, her tone sharp but laced with a hint of hope. Pyne's response is measured, almost cryptic. A chance to escape, to remember who you were, who you are. But it will cost you. Mrs. Reimer hesitates, torn between fear and curiosity. Her voice wavers as she whispers, "How much?" Pyne's smile is faint, his answer unsettlingly vague. Not in money, Mrs. Reimer, in trust. The scene ends with Mrs. Reimer staring into the fireplace, the flames dancing in her eyes. The faintest trace of a smile appears on her lips, or perhaps it's just a trick of the light. The audience is left wondering, will she take the leap, and what will it cost her in the end? Her current state, wealthy but miserable. The camera pans through the halls of Mrs. Reimer's grand estate. Marble floors glisten under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Priceless artwork hangs on the walls, and antiques are arranged with meticulous precision. Yet, the house feels cold, lifeless, a museum instead of a home. Mrs. Reimer sits in her vast dining room, a solitary figure at the end of a long, polished table. A butler pours her wine, but she waves him off with a tired sigh. The table is set for one, the silence almost deafening. Her eyes linger on an untouched meal as she mutters to herself, "What's the point of all this?" The narrator's voice cuts in. She had everything money could buy, jewels, mansions, even a yacht named after her. But what use are riches when that here is no one to share them with? Flashbacks of her life play out. Glamorous parties filled with elegant guests, but all with forced smiles. Hollow laughter echoes as champagne glasses clink. Friends who once fawned over her now drift away when the invitations stop. The narrator continues. For Mrs. Reimer, wealth had become a cage. It kept her safe, but also kept her alone. A knock breaks the silence. Mrs. Reimer's butler announces, "A Mr. Parker Pyne is here to see you, madam." She glances up, curiosity flickering. "Send him in," she says, her tone equal parts disinterest and intrigue. The camera shifts to Parker Pyne entering the room. He's not what she expected. No flashy suit, no eager smile, just a calm, steady presence that seems to fill the room. He takes a seat across from her without waiting for an invitation, his demeanor quietly confident. "Mrs. Reimer," he begins, his voice soothing yet firm, "you've come to me because something is missing." She stares at him, her guarded expression softening ever so slightly. "I don't know how to enjoy my life anymore," she admits, her voice trembling. "I've tried everything. Nothing works." Parker leans forward, his eyes piercing but kind. "Happiness," he says slowly, "is closer than you think, but it will cost you." Her brows furrow in suspicion. "Cost me? I've already paid dearly for the life I have. What more could you possibly ask for?" Pyne's faint smile reveals nothing. "Not in money, Mrs. Reimer. In trust." The room falls silent, tension thick in the air. Mrs. Reimer's fingers tighten around her glass. The flickering firelight dances in her eyes as she considers his words. Finally, she asks, "And if I don't trust you?" Pyne rises, buttoning his coat with an air of finality. "Then you'll remain exactly where you are." He begins to walk away, but her voice stops him. "Wait." She stands, her gaze steady but uncertain. "Tell me what I need to do." Pyne turns, his enigmatic smile returning. "Are you ready to leave it all behind?" The screen fades to black, leaving the audience teetering on the edge of curiosity. What will she choose? What lies ahead in this mysterious offer? And most importantly, what will it truly cost her? Experiment begins. Mrs. Reimer's trembling hands hovered over the checkbook, her heart racing as she hesitated to pen her name. £1,000, a staggering amount even for someone as wealthy as her. Yet the promise of something beyond the emptiness she felt pushed her forward. With a final shaky exhale, she scrawled her signature, sealing her fate with the stroke of a pen. Parker Pyne's eyes gleamed as he pocketed the check. "You won't regret this," he said, his voice smooth yet cryptic. "What lies ahead will change your life forever." Mrs. Reimer's curiosity clashed with unease. She had always been in control, dictating the terms of her life. But now she was surrendering herself to the unknown, entrusting her soul to a man who called himself a happiness consultant. Pyne led her through a discreet door at the back of his opulent office. It opened into a narrow hallway illuminated by dim, flickering lights. Shadows danced along the walls, creating an atmosphere thick with mystery. Mrs. Reimer's heels clicked against the polished floor, each step pulling her deeper into this enigma. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Pyne glanced back, his expression unreadable. "To the place where transformation begins." The hallway opened into a room unlike anything Mrs. Reimer had ever seen. Heavy drapes in deep shades of crimson and gold framed the space. The scent of exotic spices hung in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of incense. A low, steady hum of music was chanting, added to the surreal ambiance. Two figures emerged from the shadows. "Mrs. Reimer, meet Nurse DeSarah and Dr. Constantine," Pyne announced, gesturing to the pair. Nurse DeSarah was tall and imposing, her piercing eyes giving the impression she could see right through a person. Dr. Constantine, on the other hand, exuded an eerie calm. His thin frame and serene smile might have been reassuring under other circumstances, but here, in this strange room, it felt almost sinister. Dr. Constantine stepped forward, his voice a soft murmur. "Your sickness is not of the body, Mrs. Reimer. It is of the soul, and tonight we shall begin its cure." Mrs. Reimer's breath hitched. The words hung in the air, charged with foreboding. Before she could respond, Nurse DeSarah approached with a steaming cup of coffee. Its aroma was rich, almost intoxicating, but there was something unsettling about the way she held it as if it were a sacred chalice. "Drink this," Nurse DeSarah commanded, her voice low and firm. Mrs. Reimer hesitated, staring at the dark liquid swirling in the cup. "What is it?" "A passage," Pyne interjected, his voice cutting through her doubt. "To the life you've always dreamed of." Her fingers curled around the cup, its warmth seeping into her skin. As the room seemed to close in around her, she brought it to her lips and took a sip. The taste was bitter, almost medicinal. Her vision blurred, and a wave of dizziness washed over her. What's happening?" she slurred, the cup slipping from her grasp and shattering on the floor. The world around her tilted, the faces of Pyne, Nurse DeSarah, and Dr. Constantine blending into a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was Pyne's voice, calm and deliberate. "The journey has begun." And then, silence. What awaited Mrs. Reimer on the other side of consciousness? The answer was shrouded in mystery, leaving only one certainty: nothing would ever be the same again. The room was drenched in an air of foreboding, a dim amber light casting long shadows across the walls adorned with intricate oriental patterns. The flicker of candlelight revealed strange, ceremonial objectionate vials, ancient scrolls, and a mirror with a frame that seemed to pulse faintly, almost alive. The air was thick with the heady aroma of incense, sharp and sweet, as if masking something darker beneath. Dr. Constantine entered with a deliberate calm, his voice a measured melody that sent chills down Mrs. Reimer's spine. His dark eyes bore into hers as he uttered the words, "Your sickness is not of the body, but the soul." The sentence hung in the air, heavy with a meaning she couldn't yet grasp. Nurse DeSarah, standing silently in the corner, handed her a small porcelain cup of coffee. The liquid inside was darker than night, its surface unnaturally still, as though it resisted the laws of nature itself. Mrs. Reimer hesitated, the cup trembling slightly in her hand. She glanced at Dr. Constantine, searching for reassurance, but his expression remained unreadable, a mask of detachment that offered no comfort. "What happens if I drink this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You will understand," he replied cryptically, tilting his head as if observing a specimen. "Or you will not. Either way, the journey begins here." The room seemed to close in on her, the flickering shadows growing larger, more oppressive. She felt the weight of their gazes, not just the people in the room, but something unseen, something lurking just beyond the edge of perception. The walls, once static, seemed to breathe, the oriental patterns twisting subtly, forming shapes that disappeared the moment she tried to focus on them. Steeling herself, Mrs. Reimer raised the cup to her lips. The bitter liquid burned as it slid down her throat, leaving an aftertaste that was both metallic and sweet. Her vision blurred almost instantly, the room warping and spinning as though she were caught in a vortex. She heard a distant hum, a sound that grew louder and more distorted, transforming into a cacophony of whispers. Her limbs grew heavy, her head swayed, and she felt herself slipping, falling. Darkness enveloped her, but it wasn't silent. Echoes of laughter, faint and eerie, danced around her. A voice, Dr. Constantine's, or was it someone else, whispered in her ear, "What lies ahead is not for the faint of heart." And then, silence. The screen fades to black, leaving the audience on the edge of their seats, desperate to know, what has she just done? What is waiting for her in the void? A new life. Mrs. Reimer jolts awake, the faint smell of hay and earth filling her nostrils. Instead of her silk-sheeted bed, she finds herself lying on a creaky wooden frame with a scratchy quilt. The room is stark and unfamiliar, a far cry from the opulence she once called home. Her heart races as she sits up, scanning the peeling wallpaper and the single cracked window letting in the morning light. "Where am I?" she whispers, her voice trembling. A knock at the door startles her, and a middle-aged woman in a plain apron walks in carrying a steaming cup of tea. The woman's face is kind but weathered, her expression calm yet unreadable. "You are awake, Hannah," the woman says with a small smile, setting the tea down on the rickety nightstand. "How are you feeling?" "Hannah." Mrs. Reimer's voice is sharp, panic rising. "Who's Hannah? And who are you? What is this place?" The woman, who introduces herself as Mrs. Gardner, looks at her with a mix of patience and pity. "Oh, Hannah, don't be silly. You've lived here for years. You had a bit of a fainting spell yesterday, but you are back now." Mrs. Reimer's eyes dart around the room, landing on a framed photograph of a smiling young woman on a farm. Her face. Her hands tremble as she picks it up, recognizing the girl in the photo as herself but younger, dressed in overalls and standing next to a barn. "I don't understand," she murmurs, her voice barely audible. This isn't real." But the shocks are far from over. Mrs. Gardner sets down a folded newspaper on the small table. The bold headline catches Mrs. Reimer's attention instantly. "Wealthy widow Mrs. Reimer declared insane. Estate frozen amidst investigation." Her breath catches in her throat as she reads the article detailing her supposed mental breakdown and institutionalization. According to the piece, she had been spiraling for months, speaking incoherently about her dissatisfaction with life and vanishing without a trace. Her thoughts race. Have I been tricked? Is this some elaborate punishment? Or could this truly be my life now? She presses her hands to her temples, overwhelmed by the impossibility of it all. Her heart pounds as questions flood her mind. Who orchestrated this, and why? As tears well up in her eyes, she looks at Mrs. Gardner, who seems unshaken, even expectant. The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with the looming question: what really happened to Mrs. Reimer, and how far will she go to uncover the truth? The journey back. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the vast expanse of the farm. Mrs. Reimer, now known as Hannah, stands in front of the weathered farmhouse, the scent of fresh hay and earth mingling in the air. She's no longer the refined lady of the city, but a humble woman of the land. Her fingers, once accustomed to silk and pearls, now grasp the rough wood of a shovel, digging into the soil with surprising ease. Every day she wakes up to the simple rhythm of farm life: early mornings, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of hooves against the dirt, and the unspoken comfort of her new routine. At first it felt like a strange dream, living without the pressure of society's gaze, the glittering distractions of her past life now distant memories. But as the days pass, she begins to find solace in the simplicity of it all. She watches Joe Welsh, the farmhand, expertly tending to the animals. Here is something about his easy confidence, his quiet nature, that draws her in. He doesn't ask questions about her past. He doesn't need to. Here is an unspoken understanding between them, and with each passing day, she feels herself letting go of the woman she once was. Her hands, calloused now, no longer tremble with doubt or fear. But then, as the evening approaches and the sky deepens into a shade of indigo, the weight of her dilemma settles in. Should she stay as Hannah? The woman who has found unexpected peace in the solitude of the farm, the woman who is learning to laugh again, who is rediscovering the joy in simple things. Or should she return to her old life, the life that promised glamour, luxury, and a place in society's highest echelons? She pauses, watching Joe as he quietly whistles while tying the fence. Here is an undeniable pull to him, an intimacy forged through shared moments of silence. But what would he think if he knew the truth? What if he knew she wasn't Hannah, but a woman on the run from a past she couldn't outrun? Her thoughts spiral. What if no one believes me? What if this is where I truly belong? The question claws at her chest. Just as she begins to make sense of her confusion, the farmhouse door creaks open. A figure steps into the fading light, a man she doesn't recognize. His eyes meet hers, and for a moment, time stands still. Then, with a look of recognition, he speaks. "I knew I'd find you here, Mrs. Reimer." Her heart skips a beat. The past she thought she had buried so deep suddenly resurfaces. This man, he knows her. But how? And why is he here? The wind picks up, swirling dust around her feet. She feels the ground beneath her shift, the weight of her decision pressing harder than ever. She takes a step back, heart pounding, as the man takes another slow, deliberate step forward. "You are not safe here," he says, his voice low and urgent. "They're still looking for you." The silence between them feels suffocating, and just as the words sink in, she hears footsteps behind her. Joe. The look on his face is one of confusion and concern, but she can't afford to explain. Not now. Not when everything she's built here, every fragile hope, might be ripped away in an instant. What happens next? Does she face the past she's been running from? Or does she make the hardest choice of all, to stay as Hannah, to walk away from the life she thought she knew? As the man's hand slowly reaches for the pocket of his coat, the world feels like it's closing in on her. Will she be forced back into the life she ran from? Or will she finally embrace her new beginning? The choice is hers, but the consequences may be more than she can bear. The door creaks open once more. What happens next? The confrontation. The sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows over the farm, the quiet hum of evening settling in. Mrs. Reimer, or rather Hannah, has long since grown accustomed to the rhythm of this life, the tranquility, the simplicity, the sense of belonging. The days pass by in a haze of hard work and quiet moments with Joe, and the world feels, for the first time in years, safe. But safety, it seems, is an illusion. It happens in an instant. One moment, the farm is calm, just the wind and the rustling of leaves, and the next, here is a presence at her back. A figure, out of place in the serene landscape, standing near the gate. She turns, and her breath catches in her throat. It's him, Pyne. She'd thought he was long gone, erased from her life, just another shadow of her past. But there he is, standing in the fading light, wearing that same composed smile, the one that had once masked everything she thought she wanted. "What are you doing here?" Her voice is tight, her hands clenching at her sides, the farm's peaceful facade cracking under the weight of his unexpected appearance. Without warning, anger bursts from her. "You deceived me. You promised me a life away from all that." Her words come out in a rush, her chest heaving with the intensity of the emotion she's held in check for so long. You took everything from me, and now you show up like nothing happened. Pyne remains unmoved, his expression calm as always, as if he's seen this all before, as if he's expected it. You wanted happiness, didn't you? His voice is low, almost soothing, as if he's the one offering comfort. He steps forward, each movement calculated and precise. And I gave it to you. No one was ever meant to know the truth. His words hit her like a physical blow. What are you talking about? Her mind races, trying to piece together what he's saying. Could it be true? Had he been manipulating her all along? The life you have now, he continues, his voice eerily composed, your money, your freedom, untouched. Your life, in fact, is better than ever. You've found peace here, haven't you? You've found something you didn't know you were missing. She stands frozen, the reality of his words settling in like a bitter pill. He's right. Her life here has been far simpler than it ever was before. But was it enough? Had she really traded one cage for another? Had she unknowingly exchanged one set of chains for another, all in the name of happiness? Then the ultimate question, the one that cuts through everything. Are you happy now, Mrs. Reimer? Pyne asks, his eyes locked onto hers with unnerving intensity. The silence hangs thick in the air, and in that moment, the world seems to stop. It's the question she's avoided for so long, the one she's never dared to answer. Because if she admits the truth, everything will change. It will mean she's been living a lie, a life that never really belonged to her. For a long, agonizing moment, she stands there, struggling with the weight of his question. Her past, her future, everything she's come to care for here, everything seems to hang in the balance, suspended by a thread too thin to grasp. Finally, the words come, soft, barely audible, but enough to break the silence. Yes, I am. Her admission is quiet, but in the stillness of the evening it feels like a thunderclap. The truth, out in the open. But just as Pyne's smile widens in acknowledgement, a shadow moves in the distance, a figure, approaching fast. Someone else is here, and they've been watching the entire conversation. Her heart races. Who is it? The air around her shifts, the calm shattered in an instant. Then the game has just begun, Pyne says, his smile deepening, his eyes flickering to the newcomer. Welcome to the real test, Mrs. Reimer. You are about to find out just how much you've truly gained. Before she can react, the figure steps into the light, and it's someone she never expected to see again. Someone from her past. Someone who could ruin everything. The story is far from over. What happens now? The satisfying conclusion. The night is quieter than ever, the stars scattered across the sky like tiny diamonds, casting their soft glow over the land. Mrs. Reimer Hannah stands by the fence, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing. In front of her stands Pyne, calm as always, but this time here is something different in the air. The tension, thick and suffocating, feels like it could snap any second. She had thought she was ready to walk away from it all. But the truth is, she's not running from her past anymore, she's running towards something far more meaningful. The past, with its lies, its wealth, its empty promises, is gone. What she has now is real. Joe, the farm, the simple life she's built with her own hands. But what about the money? She swallows hard, then turns to Pyne, her voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. I want £700, she says, her words surprising even her. But they feel right. I want to buy a small farm, one that Joe and I can call our own. No more schemes, no more secrets. Just us, building the life we've dreamed of. Pyne watches her with a kind of unreadable gaze. For a moment, it seems like he might argue, or perhaps mock her decision. But instead, his lips curl into that same knowing smile, the one that always made her question everything she thought she knew. "Happiness isn't about what you have," he says softly, his voice carrying a weight that feels almost final. "It's about what you feel." For the first time in her life, Mrs. Reimer feels the truth of those words settle deep within her. The life she's chosen isn't about money or the power she once wielded. It's about the quiet moments working the land beside Joe, laughing over simple meals, finding peace in the rhythm of their days. It's a life that's real, grounded, and free of the empty promises that once defined her existence. She takes a deep breath, glancing at Pyne one last time. "You've given me what I needed," she says, her voice soft but certain, "and now I am choosing my own path." Pyne tilts his head, almost in acknowledgement, before turning to leave. But before he disappears into the night, he pauses, as if a final thought has crossed his mind. "You've made your choice, Mrs. Reimer," he says, "but remember, even the simplest of lives can hold the darkest of secrets." The words hang in the air, but before she can respond, he's gone, vanished into the shadows from which he emerged. And just like that, the weight lifts. For the first time in a long time, she feels free. As the stars twinkle above her, she turns to Joe, who's watching her from the porch. His expression is one of quiet contentment, his love for her evident in every glance. No more questions, no more doubts. They've chosen this life together, and that's all that matters. She walks toward him, the soft earth beneath her feet grounding her, the sound of their footsteps the only thing breaking the silence. Together, they stand beneath the vast sky, hand in hand, ready to embrace the future. But before she can step inside, a shadow falls across the doorframe. A figure, distant yet familiar, watches them from the edge of the farm. Her heart skips a beat. Could it be? The figure steps forward, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot, and then, in a voice she recognizes all too well, they speak. "Did you really think you could escape everything? Would she ever truly be free?" What happens next? The past has a way of catching up, and it seems Mrs. Reimer's peace may be more fleeting than she imagined.